welcome to Shade and Hunger. I'm your host Ben. On today's episode, I've been interviewed Simon Dower of legendary death metal band from Australia, Abramelin. Their new album, 20 Years, Never Enough Snuff. It's really great chatting with Simon. It's incredible sort of hearing them do something that I think very few bands get the opportunity to do. Finding themselves not really happy with not necessarily the material they put out, but the way it was recorded, the instrumentation, the production. They had the opportunity to get it right this time, and that's really exciting for a band to be able to do. To have reservations about the way they did it, to kind of understand where they kind of went wrong, and to be able to do it right one more time. And that's great. Like 20 years later, that's kind of an incredible thing. And it's a really great sort of experience sharing that with them, that they've been able to put out this really tremendous record and, understand the meaning behind that. I was also very grateful to Simon for helping out with another project that I've been working on, chatting to him about super secret subject matter, which I've been doing research into for about 2 weeks. And I now finally, after chatting to him, kind of think I have a full understanding of what I've been researching. And now I'm going to start putting it together. And that's something you can look forward to, something I'm very, very excited about. It's kind of niche, kind of very niche, but my mind has been blown by this whole thing. And I'm hoping that a couple of people get very excited about it in the same way I do. But that's soon to come. I'm very, very excited about it. Talk to Simon about their new album, Never Enough Snuff, and the tracks that I played from it in this interview are Never Enough Snuff and Knife Play. This is Simon Dower of Abramelin. For those who aren't familiar, could you run us a little bit through the band's history?
Sure. Okay, so we've been kicking around since 1988. We were formed, predominantly hailing from a small suburb in the northeastern areas of Melbourne called Montmorency, which is nestled in between a little place called Eltham and another little place called Greensborough. And kicked off back then in 88 as Archron originally, and then it was probably in around about 89, 90 or something. My memory's a bit hazy that we changed our name to Abramelin or Abramelin. There was a black metal band in the States that started off around the same time that had the name Archon as well too. So rather than getting to a big shit fight about that, I was just like, you know what, let's just change the name to save confusion for the metal community. I mean, we're like, two big fish in an extremely small pond trying to punch on, and it was just like, look, what's the fucking point? So I was more than happy to concede and change up the name. It wasn't a big deal. And been playing live since back then, released a few albums over the years, played with Cannibal Corpse, a couple of tours with Morbid Angel, a couple of tours with Cradle of Filth, Carcass, Napalm Death, bloody everyone has come through. Heaps of bands over the years. Then we had a bit of a break from 2003. We had a lazy 14 years off, and then got back together again in sort of mid to late 2016 to do a benefit show in 2017. Started touring again then, and not too long after that started writing new material, and then all of a sudden had enough new material for a new album which came out on May 15 this year called Never Enough Snuff.
You obviously working this material. You had put together a song and you released it. I think it was for Gore Whore, if I'm not mistaken. What were your feelings? What were your feelings sort of leading up to that, releasing that song? I think it was like the first material in about 20 years. How were you feeling about that?
Yeah. Look, it was strange. I mean, look, even getting back into the live circuit was pretty strange, doing those first couple of shows and, being back up on stage and belting it out once again. There's been a lot of water under the bridge, in that time. So that was unusual. But then I suppose releasing new material back out to the public again, I mean, that was was something else, because we hadn't produced anything since Dead Speak in 2000. So it was pretty much on 20 years since we'd had any recorded material out. So it was, I suppose it was like, a nervous anticipation of like seeing how the fans were going to respond to it. But it was, we've had nothing but an extremely positive response from our fans and new fans as well too, which has been absolutely fantastic.
What was the impulse to release music? Like, you played some shows. Like, what was the drive to say, like, we need to put something out there? We want to be creative again as this particular band.
Look, I think for myself and the lead guitarist Tim, who's the main songwriter, it was very much about unfinished business. He wrote a lot of the songs for this album about 8 to 10 years ago, so they've been sitting around for quite a while. Lyric wise, I didn't really start writing until we got back together and started doing the new songs, so they've only existed for a couple of years. But I mean, I was never really overly happy with the earlier recordings. The EP was quite good back in the day, the Transgression from Archon EP, but the first album, I never really liked the production. I thought it was like just meh. And then Dead Speak, when we did that, we didn't have a drummer, so it was like Tim and I just pulled that all together and did it with, programmed the drums in. So although I liked the songs on the album, and I thought the production was okay, I wasn't happy with the sound with the drums, and it always felt a little bit synthetic to me. Fast forward to now, where we've got an absolutely kick-ass lineup of musicians. This was an opportunity to not only say, hey, we're back from the dead, and here's a bunch of old bastards who are having a bit of a crack at it again, but we're actually back and we're better and we're stronger, and and here's what we can do as a full band. I mean, I always thought that we really brought it to the table as a live band. Energetically and sound-wise and everything else too. So I was trying to emulate that in a recording, and with a group of kick-ass musicians who could really do it, justice.
You mentioned that Tim had the songs gestating 8 years ago. Was he sort of planning for an eventual Abramelin reunion? What was he writing those songs for?
Yeah, look, that was, Tim just smashes out songs anyway, but that was always at the back of his mind. And Tim and I did catch up at some point when we did like a discography which came out through Century Media, probably about, I don't remember when that was, maybe 2014 or something like that. It was our self-titled albums were selling on eBay for like $150 US, things like that. It was fucking crazy shit. And the same with like the 7-inch was selling for a lot of money, hundreds as well, and so on and so forth. So Century Media had said, look, do you want to compile everything up and we'll release it on limited edition vinyl and CD and put it out to the world? So we're like, yeah, for sure, why not? So Tim and I got together at that point, and he broached it with me at that time and said, look, do you want to get the band back together and start doing some stuff? And my head wasn't really in the game at that point. I wasn't overly interested. So I think I'd even said to Tim at one point, look, I'm not into it, dude. If you want to do it, go ahead and do it and go and find some other guys and, you can relaunch it. But, I'm not really into it anymore. And then fast forward to 2016 when our now bass player and was also a guitarist at one point, Rob, contacted me and said, hey, do you want to do this show? Then, all of a sudden I was interested again. It was the right time and we got it going again. But I think it had always been in that, Tim was always hatching the plan that it would always come together in some way, shape or form.
One of the things I think that's great about Never Enough Snuff is the fact that it's very Abramelin, but it sort of, I think it really achieves, and you said this as well, that sort of really achieves kind of what you set out to kind of demonstrate, the sort of really, really solid recording. What do you think sort of similar? I mean, obviously a lot of stuff, but what do you think's changed about the sort of Never Enough Stuff as compared to your first two records?
I mean, okay, so look, lyrically, it's similar. I've always written about gore and death and so on and so forth, and making my lyrics as nasty as possible. I think there's a fine line though between just doing gore for gore's sake and then it can like get a little bit cheesy. Whereas like I actually do, I'm not saying I'm the fucking greatest writer in the world or anything, but I do put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into my lyrics, and I look at each song as a horror novella or like a short film or something like that too. Like there's like an old plot line to it, and shit goes down, whether it's like about whatever it's about. It's never good, and it's laced with a lot of gore and blood. But the album overall too, I mean, as I said earlier on too, production-wise, this is like by far the most, the best production that the band's ever had. It's absolutely outstanding, and especially that was, the way that we recorded it, and then the fact that it was mixed and mastered from Dan Swano in Sweden, or from Duty Sound. Actually, I think they're German-based these days. But anyway, who's just, produced, engineered so many, bands over the years. Especially with death metal. I mean, if you like, go to Wikipedia and look up Dan Swano and have a look at the bands he's worked with. It's like, the creme de la creme of death metal. So as far as I'm concerned, he's the godfather of production. So us, being ye olde death metal band that we are, that was the best place to go to pull the sound that we wanted. So, and then the other part of it, of course, is the musicianship. Although it's still, a lot of the same guys, and we're doing the same thing, and that everyone, I think, has matured massively over that period of time. So that I think the playing is far superior to anything else that we've done on earlier albums. I mean, just listen to the solos, listen to the guitars, the way that they're smashing it out is absolutely incredible. And then, of course, the addition of having Dave Haley on drums, from Psychroptic and all the other bands that he plays with, is definitely had a massive influence on the band too, in just how tight and precise things are. I mean, he's as good as that drum machine that we had on Dead Speak as far as precision goes, but then, just livens it up so much more because of the fact that it is organic.
I want to dive a little bit into your vocals. Let's start with the lyrics. Like, when you're sort of trying to conceive of lyrics, like, are you, like, looking to external sources? Are you sort of thinking in your head? How do you go about sort of approaching the sort of creating a basic, like, idea for what the lyrics should be?
It usually spawns with an idea. I mean, I read a lot of horror. I read horror pretty much exclusively. I find anything else boring. I've always pretty much read horror since, like, I don't know, probably high school, I suppose, and even bits of horror before that. So that's always been there, which is a great, pool to dip into for ideas. I'll read something in a book, and I might read a line or something that launches an idea, or I might have a base idea from watching. I mean, I pretty much watch a lot of horror films as well too. Of course, that goes part and parcel of my artwork. Horror lyrics, horror, sing in a band, horror. Am I painting a picture here? So there's a lot of stuff around me all the time that's easy to dip into for the content, but I which I've said in some other interviews recently, I like to keep it fair. I like to keep it because I don't want anyone to look at the artwork and go, "Oh, you're a bunch of misogynistic assholes," and it's like, you're a woman hater. It's just like, I'm not a woman hater. I fucking love women. I think women are absolutely amazing. The fact that I've got, depicting a woman getting, murdered on the cover, that doesn't mean anything against women, because delve into the lyrics inside. I don't have a crack at everyone. I've got women killing men. I've got children killing adults. I've got men killing women. I've got men killing men. I've got, everyone basically has a crack at everyone. And then once I'm done with that, then I've got, demonic forces killing people. I've got, and round it goes. So, look, to answer your question, there's always a host of really good ideas. I'll quite often come across phrases or ideas in books and things like that too, and I'll just take little notes along the way, and then I'll refer back to notes and have a look at them again, and someone had said something about the way that someone's head was impacted and the way that it was smashed in or something. I'm like, that's quite nice. I'm going to rephrase that and put that into a song and make that into a little, structure that into a bit of a paragraph and do something about that. So Yeah. Does that sort of answer your question? I know it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but...
No, it definitely does. You mentioned not making like a sort of gory for gory's sake.
Yeah.
How do you sort of walk that line? How do you craft like a good story that sort of, meets your kind of own sort of criteria?
Well, I suppose that is subjective. I mean, because other people could look at it and go, that's just fucking gore for gore's sake. I mean, the funny part, I mean, look, I laugh when I write a lot of my lyrics. I think that, to me personally, they're quite tongue-in-cheek in a lot of areas. Also, well, like one of my oldest memories of like reading books and growing up as a kid is Dr. Seuss. So if you read like Dr. Seuss books and have a look at the way that the way that they rhyme and the way they're crafted, and then look at Abramelin lyrics, you'll find it's actually not that dissimilar. And most of my stuff does rhyme. And I've always pretty much written my lyrics like that. There's not many songs that I do that, like, each sort of second line doesn't rhyme with the one previous. And then that in itself becomes a fun game for me when I'm putting together lyrics. So to be, I don't know, just pulling something in off the top of my head, something to do with your head, or then something or other till you were dead, just whatever. Of course, it gets a lot more expletive and, well thought out than that. But it's having that little game going on in the background can be quite fun too. And also way back in the day, I would sit down with like a thesaurus and I would like go through and I'd look up something really nasty in the thesaurus, and I'd have a look at all the words that go with that and then go, okay. And then I've got this big shopping list to play with of like things. I mean, much easier now with the internet that you can just go and pull things apart, but you can go to Word Rhyme and other such websites just to punch in words and phrases and things like that and get things that sort of like rhyme with them. But yeah, back then it was the old Roget's thesaurus would come out and would sit on the table next to me while I crafted songs in my room.
Mm-hmm. In sort of the terms of the vocals more broadly, which comes first, the lyrics or the vocals? And then which comes first, the lyrics or the vocals? Then we'll get to the sort of more substantive part.
What do you mean, lyrics or vocals?
So in terms of so are you writing all right, la 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 la? Are you trying to sound them out rhythmically in terms of the song? Is it sort of one package? How does that work out?
No, not really. So how it works generally is that I'll write my lyrics independent to what the songwriters when they're writing the music. So if Tim or Matt's got a song on the new album as well, he did the Pyrrhon. So the boys are away just crafting the songs. I'll write lyrics independently. They'll go, hey, I've got a new song, and I'll go, okay, well I've got 3 different songs lyrically that I've got written down here. Let's see which one of these will fit. Then I'll apply that over the top. I'll just sort of roll through it in my head and go, yeah, this sort of fits as a structure. And then I might have to edit it down and, double up on some bits to create a chorus, or, drop verses altogether because they didn't really fit. And then once I've got it sort of crafted in my head in that capacity, then I sort of play around with it vocally at the back end to sort of make it fit the song, work out where I'm going to drop in the screams, how I'm going to, which parts are going to be screaming high, which parts are deep and guttural, how I'm going to enunciate certain words, all of that sort of stuff. And even when it came down to laying down the album, there was a couple of songs that we hadn't even rehearsed as a full band. So I was laying down those tracks, what I thought would work in the studio, but then I had Matt, Dave, and the guy who I laid down the vocals with, Mark, were all basically coaching me in the studio and helping me craft the songs there to what they are. And then it'll be a matter of just then taking that out for when we do it live to recreate what I did in the studio.
We tear the skies, and love was all for a
Pleasures, the last track on the album, is re-recorded from your second album, Dead Speak. Why did you choose that particular track to re-record?
Because it was the first track off the album, basically. So when we played down in Tassie last year, and we were walking down the street going to get something to eat prior to the show that night, and we'd already started the recording process for, actually maybe it was the year before, and we were talking about it because the recording was coming up. Anyway, actually, yeah, I think it was prior to starting the recording, that's right. And we said, while we're doing the recording, what do we think about actually re-recording Dead Speak and doing it as a full band? And then, yeah, as it so happened, we're like, we started recording the new album, and we just didn't, because we were self-funding it, we didn't go to a label, we self-released, we just didn't have the funds to do both. So the compromise was that we would pick a track, and that track was Pleasures. We just thought, well, let's go with the first track off the album and do that as a full band. Basically just to sort of so we could see how Dead Speak would have sounded as a full band, and also to give the fans a taste of the same.
So Kantara and parts of Plague from their first two records, they have sort of like quite a different feel to the rest of those albums. I'm wondering if you sort of gave any thoughts to including a sort of similarly different song on Never Enough Snuff.
Yeah, look, I think song-wise it was like what we put out on Snuff was basically what was available to us and what we had to choose from. I think there was one or two other tracks that Tim had sort of hatched in the background, but we hadn't gone for I suppose for something slower and doomier like Plague was. What Tim was supposed to record, he had a couple of other acoustic pieces written, like he'd done on the earlier albums as well, but with the beginning and in the middle of Plague. But yeah, for whatever reason, he didn't get around to it, or I don't know. It just didn't happen in the end for whatever reason. So yeah, there wasn't those little acoustic drop-ins. And yeah, Plague was a little bit different, I suppose, on Dead Speak. And you know what? Actually, now that I think back on it too, Plague was another song that we'd never jammed as a band, and was the only song off Dead Speak that was done for the first time in the studio. So he'd sent me like a click track of the song, and I'd written the lyrics which I'd applied to actually a really old song that we did, and then I reworked those lyrics for Plague, and yeah, did it for the first time in the studio. And then once again, I think I probably had Tim coaching me a bit to say, yeah, look, try this, try that, and just a few different things to get the end result. And then we played it. I think it was in like 2017 or 2018, we decided to do it live, which we did at a few shows. So the very first time people got to hear it live. And then, yeah, we, put it back on the shelf again, and that was that.
Why'd you choose the title Never Enough Snuff?
I'd read a book called Survivor. Is it J.F. Gonzalez, I think is the name of the author. I can't remember his name exactly. He did a book called I think it's the same guy who did Jigsaw Man. But anyway, Survivor is it's a graphic horror novel about snuff films, and the girl that gets captured and caught up in that whole hoo-ha. And I've read that recently to doing the first few rehearsals back, when Tim said, right, I've got a new song, and started just showing the other guys his new song, and Dave started putting down drums to it, and Matt and Rob are going along, and at that point I'm just basically a fifth wheel. I sit over in the corner and go, right, I can either sit there and game on my phone or check Facebook updates, or I can write a song. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to write a song. So I basically smashed out Never Enough Snuff in 20 minutes, inspired by that book. I'd read that book in recent times, and because that was the first song and it was snuff based, that it was became the concept for the album cover, and And the first track on the album.
So I read in Heavy, I think it was Heavy, sort of the story behind the sort of true album cover, like I think it's the photography session that you did.
Yeah.
I think it was Tim. I'm curious about the sort of digital album cover. What's the story behind that?
Yeah. Headrush is the artist, which is actually Sally Ann Moore. She did the artwork for the self-titled album and also for Dead Speak. So I wanted to get her back in to do Never Enough Snuff as well. So we had the actual the true cover of the album we did as a I've got a good friend who does film and television makeup, and she did all the special effects for the shot. Tim and his partner Michelle are featured on the cover. So just so you know that no one was actually killed in the making of this album. And I've got another friend of mine who's a photographer who Martin Reddy, who did all the did the shots for it and did all the after effects and everything else too, to make it look nice and gritty. Then I took it to Sal, and at that time, because we thought we were going into retail, I was like, okay, see what you can come up with for a cover to go over the cover. So initially it was just like we were going to have, we had a few different ideas. It was going to be sort of like something that looked like black plastic with blood on it wrapped in barbed wire, sort of like, like the Evil Dead remake on the book. Then we had, just, there was a few different things that we played around with. We just had some, we've been onto iStock looking at things and, had a bit of this and had a bit of that. And I think we did have a cover pretty much picked out. And then the graphic design company she was working for, she went back and read like the T's and C's in iStock, and it said, this, none of these images may be used in anything that's like, sensitive, shall we say. And she was like, well, fuck. That really kicks everything off there, off there. I was like, so she's like, let me come up with something. So she basically had a head, because at one point we had that head side on, and I was going to go with I think it's the sixth track on the album is Horizontal, and that was going to be the name of the album. And because that head's like laying down and horizontal and everything, it was like, well, let's go with that. And we had another image of there was a bunch of sort of like bodies in a crypt that were stacked on top of each other, and then we were going to go horizontal, and then that was going to be the cover. And anyway, as it ended up, I quite like that image of the corpse, head side on, in somewhat of a state of putrefaction. And then she just went through and photoshopped the producers out of it, and came up with a digital cover, which I thought came up really, really nice. She spent a lot of hours on it, and it looks amazing.
Finish off some last sort of questions about you. In terms of this is kind of the thing that really interests me. Like when you were so like 1988, like death metal was only sort of just becoming a thing. Like in terms of your vocal styles, who did you sort of look to? What were you kind of trying to do back in those days? How did that sort of you sort of develop it in the early days?
Yeah. Look, it's an interesting one, because people say to me, like, where who do you try and emulate, or where do you get your vocals from? There was things I was listening to back at the time. For us, it was back in the late 80s, so I suppose around 88, when our band was quite young. I was listening, I'd started tape trading around that time, so we had like first demos of, Nihilist before they were Entombed, and very early, Morbid Angel and things like that. But it was predominantly what was happening in Sweden that really captured my attention. So it was bands like Grave and Dismember and Unleashed and so on and so forth. There was something about the Swedish sound that was really heavy, but it had a bit of a rock feel to it as well. And I think it was that is what I was predominantly listening to, and not necessarily copy. I think it was just a tone that I was trying to reach, and then ultimately where we ended up at was just me getting my voice as heavy as I could get it. But then also going through a phase of not trying to just make it heavy for heavy's sake, because I didn't want to sacrifice what I was saying. So I would try and get as heavy as I could, but make sure that you could understand what I was saying still. And that is a fine line. And I always compare it to people with thick accents. So if you're speaking to someone, say, with a strong English or Scottish or, something accent, it's just at first you're like, man, what the fuck is that person saying? But once you start picking up on it and listening to them more and more, you're like, oh, okay, I get what this person's saying now. Same goes with death metal. So if you have an ear for it and understand it, then you'll pretty much catch most things I'm saying.
So you released the second album in 2000. I think it's 2017 when you do your show, sort of first show back. What was it sort of coming back to it and sort of doing, vocals?
It was hard. It was really hard. The first rehearsal, I think I got about 5 songs out, and I had to call it, I had to tap out. My throat was fucked. It's not something that you can really you can train for. I mean, I've mentioned this to a couple of people. It's they say that physiologically our cells regenerate every 7 years and they're brand new. So you look at something like tissue in your throat. That means I'm twice regenerated from the last time that I'd sung death metal. So although the memories there of how to do it and how to get it out, it was it was fucking brutal. I absolutely shredded my throat. I think after the first rehearsal, I almost lost my voice. Not permanently, but I was pretty raspy and pretty high pitched for a couple of days afterwards. But then, a lot of other things too, I quite often compare it to gym training. If you haven't done squats before and you go and chuck your body weight on top of you on a bar and then go and pump out squats, your hamstrings and your glutes and everything are shredded for days, and you walk around fucking been horse riding for 24 hours. But it's eventually, as you keep going back to the gym and keep going, then those muscles become accustomed to it and it's not so bad. Same thing with death metal. So it hurts a lot the first couple of times, but then the more you do it, the throat becomes accustomed to it, eases back, and then it's all right. So yeah, I do hold in high regard bands who actually do international tours and go back to back night after night doing it. I think is a whole other level again. I'm glad that I just have to do it. When we do it, it's just more sporadic. I'll rehearse sort of week to week, and when we do shows, they're sort of usually one-offs, or if anything, a couple of nights in a row. But I wouldn't fancy going out on the road for a month and playing every night. I don't think I'd have a voice.
This is a little bit of a hard one, but any sort of favourite horror films or books that you can sort of point to?
Yes, that is a hard one. I get asked that a lot. It's just fucking hell. Horror films, look, there's way too many. I've been watching horror since I was a kid. I'm 50 this year. So you're talking 40 to 45 years worth of horror films. I've seen a lot. Difficult. Books. Look, authors. I've got I've got a few faves. I'd have to say that Edward Lee's right up there as one of my faves in horror in recent times. His books are absolutely appalling, as in a really good way. So he's well worth looking out for. Who else? Brian Keene's another one. Love his stuff. Who else? Matt Shaw, I've read a bit of. He's pretty good. But look, if you really want to start and read some really over-the-top, gratuitous horror, then yeah, you can't go past Edward Lee. He's a really, really good one to start with. Yeah, he's pretty over the top, and that's a sort of been a bit of an evolution in horror, I suppose, of the way it has been in metal too, and getting really, really over the top. And with those aforementioned authors that I was talking about, is more around the splatter punk genre, which sort of blurs that line in between just the usual sort of gratuitous graphic horror, but mixes in sex and other pretty over-the-top adult themes to sort of like go places where like authors, never really went in the past, and they go in there like good nard, no lube. So, yeah, pretty interesting.
And last question, what have you been listening to, reading, watching, or playing lately?
Reading more horror. What am I reading at the moment? I'm reading a book. I'm just like flicking into my Kindle at the moment. Reading a book by a chick, actually, Monica O'Rourke, called Suffer the Flesh, which is pretty over the top, about a girl who gets trapped by. Actually, I won't go into the juicy details of it, but yeah, it's pretty brutal. As I said, look, I really do. I'm a PT, so if I'm not, this is going to sound odd, but like when I'm not studying and reading about like new exercise techniques, or like reading about running, or reading about like physical activity and how to like train the body and stay really fit, I read graphic horror. and then movie-wise, what do I watch? Well, look, if it's just me, I'm watching horror. But otherwise, I watch movies with my kids. So we watch a lot of family films, and I watch a lot of TV shows, and just I don't know. I suppose usual stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a dad, and I, I'm not going to subject my children to horrible things. I have in the past, but it quite often ends in tears. So I'm try and have a... actually, usually my wife is the filter in that situation because I don't have one. And gaming, not too much these days. Although, ironically, my son's he's 10 years old, and he's just recently developed a bit of a taste for horror gaming. So I tend to sort of like just watch him play more than anything else too. But it's he's getting right into it and really enjoying the horror games, which is pretty cool. Come a long way, so it's pretty entertaining to watch him.
That was Knife Play by Abramelin from the album Never Enough Snuff, and before that we heard the title track, Never Enough Snuff. Thanks again, Simon, for chatting to me. It was a real pleasure, and I really appreciate him both sharing his insights on the new record as well as that other thing that will be soon to come. Before I leave you, I want to recommend 2 albums. First up, a split between Exhumed and Gruesome, Twisted Horror. Now this is a really cool record because it displays kind of different styles of death metal. Exhumed and Gruesome, both related bands, because Matt Harvey is in both of them. And what makes it a really good listen is both, you have a more extreme, aggressive style of death metal, as well as a more old school style of death metal in Gruesome. But you also have, what I find really interesting, the vocal performance of Matt Harvey. And I've, for a long time, been a fan of Matt Harvey. I've always loved the rhythm of the 2-part vocals in Exhumed. There's something about it which I just think is sort of the pinnacle of sort of structure of vocals. But also it's really interesting to see him do his sort of, vocal style he's honed over 30 years in Exhumed, but also his style reminiscent of Chuck Schuldiner in Gruesome. Gruesome, for those who don't know, is a band which is very explicitly a tribute to a certain era of death, Chuck Schuldiner's band. And it's sort of, I think it's the second to fourth record, if I'm not mistaken, sort of before they went more progressive. And that makes for a really interesting listen as well. Also want to recommend an album by Pyrrhon called Abscess Time. Now this is on, it's difficult to pin down, but I'll sort of describe it as on the sort of more abrasive end of technical death metal, if any of you sort of understand what those means, or it's not necessarily just playing sort of technical scales and stuff like that, but it's sort of very intentionally using, I don't know if I necessarily describe it as dissonance or atonality, but it's something that's a little bit less friendly on the ears. But this one is a little bit more so, and it's more experimental. It goes in a lot of different directions. I think a Bandcamp reviewer described it quite well as a trustful exercise. So if you're, a little bit more open to some of the sort of more, less friendly types of music, I definitely recommend that to you. You can catch me on social media at AusHunger, that's AUS Hunger, on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And you can also send me an email, australianhunger@gmail.com, any comments, questions, or if you want to set up an interview, maybe we can get that happening. But until next time, thanks for listening. Bye.